raft was shattered by a scarlet iron fist. And Connolly was there, Connolly was there, brave and undaunted, James Connolly was there.
50 years ago, the governance of a whole segment of the UK state broke down. 50 years later, it still hasn't been restabilised. This collapse happened in Northern Ireland, and it happened because the partition settlement imposed on Ireland in 1921-2 simply wasn't viable. For 25 of those 50 years, there was a simmering outright war in Northern Ireland. There was a guerrilla insurgency led by people in the Irish Republican movement who considered themselves to be revolutionaries, and they had significant community support. Even before the explosive events of 1968-9, Marxists had been debating how and whether the complex issues of national and communal rights in Ireland could feed into socialist mobilisation. They'd been debating whether and how revolutionary socialists could link up with the revolutionary tradition in Ireland. The official communist parties believed the developments had to take place in stages. The first stage would be a battle for democratic rights in Northern Ireland. Second would be a fight for bourgeois democratic change in Ireland as a whole, to undo partition and unite the island. The third and final stage would be the fight for socialist politics, for a socialist Ireland. Some on the Trotskyist left argued that the alternative to this stage's theory was permanent revolution, meaning a sort of merger of the democratic and the socialist revolutions, making connections between the nationalist upsurge and socialist revolution. Others argued even before 1968-9 that the whole permanent revolution formula, which was built on analyses of Tsarist Russia, of Spain and of China and other anti-imperialist struggles in the first part of the 20th century, didn't really fit with the particular realities of Ireland. From these theoretical differences came divergent political approaches. Rayner Lysaght and Matgamna have been prominent in this debate for over 50 years now, right back to the days of the Irish Workers' Group in the mid to late 1960s. In November 2018, they came together to debate permanent revolution in Ireland at a public meeting in London. They then pursued the issues in a long filmed conversation the next day. So here it is, 50 years of Marxist debate on Ireland, summarised and reviewed.
I want to make 3 general points, and then I'm going to concentrate on the permanent revolution and Ireland. First point is that this isn't just a debate between two old dodgers who can't forget the past. Permanent revolution, the idea that provisional IRA could lead, that they could spark a revolution that would become a working class revolution. That was a powerful idea all over the world among Trotskyists. So it's not just an odd debate, it's really a looking back at the history of the Orthodox Trotskyists. Second point I want to make is that I need to explain what I'm doing. I am a Trotskyist, been a Trotskyist for next year 60 years. I remain a Trotskyist. I'm not questioning or denying that permanent revolution had the possibility of making a world revolution in the 20s and 30s and 40s. I'm not denying any of that. Permanent revolution was right against the Stalinists, and it was a viable perspective for revolutionaries. But unfortunately, we were defeated. We were defeated everywhere, and then the world moved in a different direction. And third point, I've been in debates about this sort of question with a lot of people, and in a number of the debates, including one with Rayner, I was dismissed as a mere Englishman. Now, I'm not an Englishman, mere or large. My entire political outlook is rooted in the fact that I am based an Irish Republican. But I think you have to think about the issues. You know, you can't go on tradition as the provisional and other Republicans do, or try to. You can't go on slogans which use the catchphrase. You have to think about it. Now, what was the permanent revolution? The idea, first occurs in Karl Marx, I think it's about 1851, in the aftermath of the defeated bourgeois would-be bourgeois revolution to 1848. He talked about the revolution continuing. Now, that really had no outcome, that idea. Trotsky revived or developed the theory of permanent revolution in relation to Russia. Now, what was it? It wasn't an outline of what might have been possible. It was an analysis of the classes and their interactions in Russian society. And in order to grasp the permanent revolution, you have to schematize things a little bit. There are revolutions in history, bourgeois revolutions. The classic bourgeois revolution was that of France in 1789 and afterwards. What did it do? Well, it broke the power of the landlords. It distributed or legalized the seizure of land by the French peasants. It smashed the monarchy, as Trotsky expressed it, threw the head of a king down as a challenge to royalist Europe. This created bourgeois society, a bourgeois republic, but above all bourgeois market-dominated, money-dominated social relations. Now, other countries after France were as backward or more backward than France at the time of the Great Revolution. Russia was more backward by far. And in countries like Russia, specifically here Russia, the Marxists said, well, look, the only revolution possible here is a bourgeois revolution. The question of what exactly the bourgeois revolution would be divided the Marxists. Now, Lenin and Trotsky were on one side, the Mensheviks on the other. And the Mensheviks were no contemptible group of people. George Plekhanov was a great Marxist in the Great Revolution. He got lost at the end, but that happens. Lenin analysed the Russian bourgeois revolution, which he thought was bourgeois, as follows. The bourgeoisie is weak. The working class is very strong because it's organised in giant factories which are derived from European and American technology, not from Russian backwardness. It's an alien element, if you like, within Russian society. And so what's going to happen in this bourgeois revolution, said Lenin? Well, what's going to happen is that the bourgeoisie will not lead the bourgeois revolution. They can't. They're tied to the landlord by financial ties. They're scared of the working class because the working class is powerful. There were great waves of strikes in Russia in the 90s. And Lenin concluded that the bourgeoisie would not lead the bourgeois revolution. And his political conclusion was that it would have to be a revolution led by the peasants and the workers, the plebeian classes, the democratic classes, and it would have to take as its model the sort of radical transformation that the Jacobins in the French Revolution aimed for. Lenin argued with the Mensheviks. Lenin advocated a coalition government. The Mensheviks would later on do it, but Lenin advocated it, but it was a coalition government of workers and peasants, the democratic classes, the plebeian classes. Now, Trotsky agreed with this entire analysis, this interaction of the classes. But Trotsky went slightly further than Lenin. Lenin said Trotsky is right, however, it's not true that there will be an alliance, a dictatorship, and of equal parts, workers and peasants. The peasantry, said Trotsky, will follow the workers if the workers take the lead. And when the workers take power, they will not stop at carrying through the bourgeois revolution. They'll carry through what they demand themselves, things like an 8-hour day and various forms of regulation of the bourgeoisie. And Trotsky concluded this will have to be a working class revolution, backed by the peasantry, the workers leading the peasantry, but fundamentally a working class revolution. A bourgeois revolution that, in order to be victorious, forced to go beyond that and become a workers' revolution. Now, Russia remained entirely backward Lenin didn't think otherwise, never thought otherwise, neither did Trotsky. So what about that? How can you have a workers' revolution in one of the most backward states of Europe? And Trotsky said, well, you can't. The workers can take power, they can hold power, they can stimulate the people, the working class of Europe, but Russia's salvation will be that the revolution will spread to advanced countries, and Russia in the future United States of Europe will be a backward appendage of the advanced countries. But Russia will not be able to carry through a socialist revolution. It was impossible. Now, right, so Trotsky then, later on, he generalized the idea of permanent revolution to the colonies. The idea there was that the bourgeoisie would not lead a national struggle. And they would maybe lead struggles, but never fully exercise struggles, never able to lead a mass national revolution. Now, that idea was incorporated in the Communist International, one of its most important documents, the thesis on the national question of 1920. And it's not the phrase isn't there, permanent revolution, but the idea is there that the bourgeoisie will not necessarily, even in the bourgeois revolution, hold state power in any stable way. Right, so that's the permanent revolution. Now, in reality, the Stalinists dominated the international communist movement from the middle 20s. They perverted the tactics that Lenin and others had laid down in 1921. They subordinated the workers of China, for example, to the Kuomintang. They actually organized the Kuomintang on the model of the increasingly Stalinized Communist International. The workers were subordinated to the Kuomintang Chiang Kai-shek, and the workers were massacred in a sudden treacherous move by Chiang in 1927. And throughout the world, the communist parties, the Stalinist parties, remained in the leadership of the revolutionary workers. And there was no possibility of the working class taking the lead and creating a permanent revolution dynamic that would end in a workers' republic. What happened, and again I'll have to telescope it for time, was that a number of revolutions were carried out by Stalinists, not basing themselves on the working class, but on the peasantry. Yugoslavia, for example, China, and what they created was not the bourgeois democratic republic that would guarantee the liberties of the bourgeois democratic liberties of countries like Britain, create those liberties. You got Stalinist states in which there was, right from the very beginning, an elite movement made up of declassed intellectuals and some declassed workers at the head of peasant armies. And what they created was a state based on the Stalinist Russian model. The working class never took power in those countries. The Chinese working class immediately faced repression from the Stalinists once they took the cities. Symbolically, perhaps, the Stalinists overturned the gravestone of the founder of the Chinese Communist Party. So then you have the Trotskyist movement. We are committed to the idea of permanent revolution. But that hasn't happened. Something very different has happened. And you get then what I would call millenarian permanent revolution. Millenarians expect the second coming, the return of Christ, the all-transforming revolution. And millenarians tend to look out at what's happening in the world. There's an example. This proves we're right. And what you got was the Trotskyist movement identifying the Stalinist states as examples of permanent revolution, which was absolute bloody nonsense. The Stalinist states were what they were. They were good or bad, progressive or reactionary, but they most certainly were not the states in which the working class had led the peasantry and the working class had power, and the working class created things like civil liberty. That's not what you had. And you get then a very vague rendering of permanent revolution, which is denatured, stripped down, large parts of it thrown away. You get, for example, a leader of the Fourth International, the Mandel Pablo International, Pierre Frank, in 1956 maybe, argued in an introduction to some writings of Trotsky that Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Revolution, was really the legatee of Trotsky, not Stalin, not of Stalin. And you get stuff like that. Now, it's only in the context of this completely bowdlerized permanent revolution that you can get ideas such as Lysaght here has always defended, that Ireland somehow, by way of the provisional IRA campaigns, would in fact experience a revolution, similar to Castro's revolution. Now, all right, let's take Ireland. First of all, there's a matter of the concrete history of Ireland. Ireland has had 3 revolutions. We're in the middle of one of them now. Right, the first revolution was the revolution on the land. The Irish people, the Catholic people, were conquered. They were forced to submit to the power of alien landlords. They were robbed. They had no rights. People like, for example, Cobden and Bright, Richard Cobden and John Bright, pioneers of free trade in England, who did a lot to enlighten England about Ireland's wrongs in the middle of the 19th century. They talked about Ireland as a feudalistic system. And Michael Davitt, who organised the peasants, he was a socialist and maybe even some sort of Marxist. Michael Davitt called his book about the land struggle in Ireland, The Fall of Feudalism in Ireland. He wrote that, I think, in 1905. And you had great backwards. And I think it was a variant of feudalism. You know, it was a system whereby power, state power, coercion, played a far bigger role than commercial monetary activities. For example, the peasant, the Irish farmer, would lease the land. He was there at the will of the landlord. You know, no tenure was a tyrant's will, as Thomas Davis put it, discussing the state of the Irish. The farmer could not own any improvements he made, any investments he made in labour or capital. He could not own such things as he made on the land of the farmers. So it was the landlord, not the farmers. The landlord could kick him out and simply seize, confiscate elements of capitalist accumulation, which in England had in fact led to capitalist accumulation and helped develop capitalism. And how was that situation changed? Well, there were tremendous agitations, there were secret societies, peasants' risings, peasants took part in 98, for example, and they were always defeated. And then a certain change was wrought in England's approach to Ireland. England was concerned with Ireland as a weak link in its defences as a possible basis for war, or for foreigners to land and make war in England. And they carried out a series of land reforms. The first one was linked with the disestablishment of the Anglican Church, which was the third church in Ireland, where everybody, Presbyterians and Catholics, had to pay their tithes, the tenth of their income, to the established church. John Bright took the initiative in adding the idea that it would help peasants buy out their landlords, you know, if they were willing to sell, etc. Now, this was coupled with the idea of the peasant having to have a very large part of the price. I don't know, something like 2/3. And it didn't have much practical effect. It was, in principle, however, a very important thing. The Tory party, which is not the landlord's party as we sometimes imagine. Frederick Ingalls observed it, I think it was 1873, that the Tory party was no longer just a landlord's party. It had become the party of the bourgeoisie as well, the main party. And the Tories carried through a tremendous revolution on the basis of what the Liberals had started. there were a number of land acts in which the state gave all of the price to buy out a willing landlord to the peasant, for which the peasant entered into commitment to pay back over 30 or 40 years as a sort of mortgage, the money advanced by the state. And very often the payment to the state was less than the rent agreement. They actually created, out of landlordism, a class of peasants. Now, this took a long time. It didn't happen all at once. There were a number of different acts, there were crises. There was a crisis as late as 1909, but the decisive thing was in 1903, the so-called Wyndham Land Act, which was prepared by a conference of peasants and landlords in 1902, which laid out the basis on which they would do a deal, and the government then financed it in the Wyndham Land Act. Now, that was the bourgeois revolution. Ireland had a tremendous transformation. In some history books talk about modernisation, but from our point of view, this was the bourgeois revolution. The second revolution was the political revolution. Ireland was subordinated to England. Ireland and England, or rather Britain, were united in 1801, and Ireland had no protection against the far more vigorous and wealthy industry of England, and it was a catastrophic effect. And many, many things followed from that. Agitation against the Act of Union developed in the early 19th century. Now, at the time of the Act of Union, Catholics had favoured it, and Protestants tended not to be for it. Catholics favoured it because they believed that the Union would give them equality before the law, which they didn't have. This didn't go the way the Prime Minister of England, the younger Pitt, had wanted it to go. The half-mad King George III decided that this equality for Catholics was against his coronation oath, and this scotched it. So then the Catholics had to agitate for equality through the first, 30 years of the 19th century, which they won. In the course of doing that, they had alienated Protestants who had been for Catholic rights, and the reason was they were scared, the Protestants, of Catholic rule becoming Rome rule. The leader of the Catholic emancipation movement, Daniel O'Connell, was himself quite a liberal Whig in many respects, but he was absolutely in the hands of the priests. The priests organised the movement. And as a result of this sort of division, you got a demand for, a growing demand for Irish home government, and at the same time you got an alienation of the Protestants in the north of Ireland, who didn't want to become a minority under a Catholic majority, in which they could see, for example, that the priests were central. All right, so the Irish Revolution took a long time to develop. At the end of the process, 1910, 1912, and afterwards, you got Ireland demanding home rule for home rule that would in fact be very, very limited. I mean, home rule as planned at that point didn't mean a lot more than the
provincial assembly,
the London County Council that later developed. And nevertheless, it split Ireland down the middle, Protestant versus Catholic. And it led to a number of crises in which finally there was an attempt by the Liberal government in 1912, the Liberal government dependent in the House of Commons on Irish votes for all this business. You got the attempt to bring in the third Home Rule Bill, for which there was a majority in the House of Commons. There was a Home Rule Bill that was defeated in the Commons in 1886. There was a Home Rule Bill that passed the Commons and was defeated in the Lords, which had an absolute power of veto in 92-93. And there was a new Home Rule Bill in which there was no power of veto for the Lords, They'd lost it in the great struggle with the Liberals in 1910. And in fact, Orange opposition then took the major form of physical demonstrations, and they organised an army. They brought in guns from Germany. One of the factors that may have influenced Germany to do what it did in the way that triggered the First World War was the belief that England was in fact on the brink of civil war and wouldn't dare act according to its treaty obligations to other countries. That may have been a factor. But the Tory party backed the organised quasi-rebellion of ultra-Protestantism. The Protestants said in a slogan, "Home rule will be Rome rule." And in reality, that, as it turned out in the South, was in fact pretty much what it became. If the Unionists had all been in one state with the Catholics, maybe they would have made a difference. But we don't know that, we can't know that. And in any case, they revolted. And they demonstrated that Irish unity and Irish independence, even very limited independence, were incompatible. You couldn't have United Ireland if you had a move away from Britain, because the Protestants would veto it. And in reality, that's what they did. The Unionists were the first people to bring the gun back into Irish politics. They did it after 1912. And they succeeded in coercing the British government. The British government accepted, in principle, the idea of partition. Now, there was a dispute about what partition would actually mean. There were three models in circulation. Secession or separateness of 4 counties in the northeast, 6 counties, or 9 counties, which is the whole province of Ulster. And finally, they settled for 6. But in those 6 counties, the Protestant Unionists were in fact the majority, only in the northeast of the 6 counties. To a large extent, it's about half the territory of the 6 counties. All on the border, the majority were in fact for being in the United Ireland. And nevertheless, they insisted, the Protestants, on keeping them in their state that somebody called a Protestant state for a Protestant people. And thereby they destabilised their state. At the end of the day, you need to ask yourself, why the hell did those people, who were not stupid, create a 6-county state that was unviable because of a big minority who were against it, and a minority that was known to breed quicker? And the answer has to be that those people were imperialists. They were the same people who worked out the Versailles Treaty in 1919. The Versailles Treaty that simply locked nations and bits of nations in alien states and created the basis of tremendous conflict, some of which led into the Second World War. They didn't think of their part of Ireland as only Northeast Ulster. Discussion on Ireland having 2 nations has centred on the Protestants being the second nation. But that idea was around a very long time, and the Protestant nation, as they saw it, as its people saw it, was spread throughout the island. There was, for example, 25%, I believe, of the population of Dublin were Protestant, and most of them Unionists. So, in fact, you got an unviable 6-county state. On the other hand, it's great difficulty in destroying it. But what you put in its place? What you have to put in its place is some system, or Ireland or whatever, which reconciles the Protestants to being what they are, a minority in the island. If you look at why things went the way they did, one of the central factors was that the Orangemen were allied to the Tory party, the Nationalists to the Liberal Party, and each Irish group looked to the British government to coerce its Irish antagonists. Now, as it happened, the Liberals reneged and the Tories stuck by the Irish element. But in reality, the whole thing has been inviolable. But is this the bourgeois revolution? Well, no, it's not. Ireland had its bourgeois revolution, and on the land, its political revolution. Permanent revolution is the fusion of two revolutions. Energy taken from the peasantry by the proletariat to actually smash the system. None of that exists in Northern Ireland. Permanent revolution never made any sense, and all it ever did as an artifact politically was to lead people to develop illusions in the IRA, or in a ridiculously small group that Rayner and I had some contact with, Serre, the Guivarist group. It's long, long gone. And it's not good. At the end of the day, permanent revolution has no bearing on Ireland. You know, you can imagine alternative histories at different times, where the northern Protestant workers took the lead, where the British workers took the lead and led a land revolution in Ireland. You can imagine things like that, but that didn't happen. There's no basis for permanent revolution. In his interview with Martin Thomas, I'll have to finish now, yeah? In his interview with Martin Thomas in our current paper, Rayner cites such a thing as the language disputes. I mean, look, language equality is often an element in the struggle for oppressed people. You know, people who have a language, they're not allowed to speak, or there isn't the official language. You know, language can be a great instrument of oppression. But that's nothing to do with Ireland. The Irish language died out in most of Ireland in the 19th century. The people who took power after the Irish political revolution, 1916 to 22, they were in both the main gatherings, the antagonistic parties. They were in fact part of a Gaelic cultural sect, and a Gaelic cultural sect took power in the 26 counties. And they used their power to oppress a people, the working class people particularly, who spoke English, whose parents and grandparents spoke English. The language question has bugger all to do with anything, or it should have bugger all to do with anything. I'll have to finish now. Thank you.
That blazing light, that beacon bright, that flame it's burning still, and Connolly will be there. Connolly will be there, brave and undaunted. James Connolly will be there.